Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I've Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio.
Wow, my introduction. Okay, so just to peek behind the curtains, I think Anney has already alluded to this because we have been kind of MIA this week. Seattle, which we went on for my birthday trip in September. It is now October 4th, 2024. Not only gave me a delightful time and such great views, but also COVID. So I have been struggling a little bit this week. I will say it has not been as bad as the previous COVID episode, but it has affected me to the point that, yes, I have gotten an ultra stuffy or sexy low key voice. That very deep sound that you hear is my voice. Apologies. But it also sounds like I'm very stuffed up. So again, apologies. ASMR, unlike the ones people have requested, this is against your will, and I apologize. But as you know, we have to give you the content. We want to give you this content. And I'm actually pretty excited because we've talked about this movie for so long, to the point that Anney thought we had already done an episode.
Yeah, I thought we had because you, I believe, had told me so much about it. I watched it.
Yes.
And I knew I had watched it. And I was like, does that mean we did an episode on it? Or was I just doing that thing where I'm like, I'm interested in this. Let me see it.
Yeah, you took a whole big list of my 90s classics.
I did.
And Death Becomes Her, yes, that is the movie, is one of them that we talked about for a while. I'm like, oh, we need to do this. Even though where it lies under like feminist movies, it is not. I guess we could twist it and say, sure. Because there are some conversations around it that I love that has become of it. But in the end, it's like, oh, this didn't really age well if you're watching it just from one perspective. But we'll get into that in a minute. And for one of this month's movies, yes, and we're going to do a few. I have a feeling, or at least two, because, you know, it's October. It's the spooky season, one of Anney's favorite, and mine too, for so many other reasons, not just because of horror. I know, don't get me, Anney. But, you know, fall season. Fall season just feels good anyway. So we decided, again, to jump into this classic. Yes, as you may suspect, it is a Sam's Choice movie that, again, has not really aged well, but at the same time, has kind of fought against what you would think. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So before we start, content warning, there's, of course, murder and death, sexism, ageism, fat phobia, and all things the early 90s used as comedic relief that has not translated well, I will say, but does have a lot of thoughts and conversations around. And yeah, again, we're talking about the cult classic Death Becomes Her with icons Meryl Streep, Goldie Hawn, and Bruce Willis. Yes, so surprising. And I do want to talk about the fact that their acting was what really carries this movie. Like, even with all of the controversy, you have A-listers in here that just brings about such great chemistry with unlikely characters. So Meryl Streep playing this very comedic character was different for her at this point. Bruce Willis coming out of doing all the diehards to this character was very, like, shocking for so many. And they did a great job. And the movie was written by David Cope and Martin Donovan and directed by Robert Zemeckis, which was coming around with all of the Back to the Future, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which I didn't realize was his movie. But, you know, we've talked about that too. And I think we need to come back to that. Have you watched that? Was that on your list?
It's too scary. No, I should rewatch it. But when I saw it as a kid, it scared me. Perfect for October.
I love that this is one of those movies that are not scary, but is scary to you. And that's perfect. Because I have several of those. And the reviews, well, they were mixed. Rotten Tomatoes was sitting at like 55%. And even Siskel and Ebert, and these are old school movie critics. I hope you know, but I might just be that old because I know the company's still around. Yeah. Because Robert Ebert has died since then, and so it's Siskel, I believe. But like, Oh, anyway, but they gave him a thumbs down. Both of them did. But the movie made quite a bit of money, and they even won an Academy Award and a BAFTA for their visual effects. And not so surprising, Streep was nominated for a Golden Globe, but she didn't win. So, heartbreak of heartbreaks. So let's jump into the movie. We are introduced to the main characters, Madeline Ashton, or Mads, played by Meryl Streep, Helen Hell Sharp, played by Goldie Hawn, and Dr. Ernest Menville, played by Bruce Willis. And the latter are attending mass play, which is not getting a good reception, but Ernest is smitten. Ernest, who is currently engaged to Helen, tries to convince her that he would never leave her for Mads, which is Helen's greatest fear and kind of a test she puts on her men because they have left her for her. And even though he said, no, never going to happen. Alas, it is a lie, as we soon see him and Madeline get married, leaving Helen behind. We then see that Helen has not taken it well and has gotten lost in her obsession with her hate for Madeline, accompanied by her love for frosting and cats. Of course, cats. Yeah. Helen is then hospitalized and undergoing intense therapy where her obsession continues and drives all the other patients mad as well. Mads, you know what I'm saying? But then we cut to seeing how miserable Madeline and Ernest are, and Madeline is under constant scrutiny and fear as she grows older and is no longer in the acting world, or welcomed anyway. And Ernest, a once promising plastic surgeon, is now an alcoholic mortician. And by the way, they hate each other, of course. But they get an invite to Helen's book release party, which throws Madeline down the road to trying to look her best, or at least better than Helen, trying to look younger and making Helen jealous. Unfortunately, Madeline has hit the limit of the treatment she is wanting because causing her to lose it, but she does receive a business card with the name of a wealthy socialite, Liesel von Ruhmen, who works miracles for her clients. Wink, wink. Jump to Madeline and Ernest attending Helen's party, where they see Helen for the first time in years, and she has changed remarkably and looks even younger, more glamorous, and way skinnier. Y'all, the fat suit, actually, in comparison to the other fat suits I've seen recently, is better, but it's still really, really offensive.
Yeah.
Both of those things. But whatever. Here, Helen begins her groundwork of destroying Madeline by turning Ernest against her. Yes, we see all these in the behind the scenes, but Madeline, quite shaken from her encounter with Helen, goes to get comfort in her much younger lover, who also rejects her and tells her to find someone her own age, essentially. Really sad. She leaves in distress, but finds Liesel's card and rushes to Liesel's mansion for a fix. Here we meet Liesel, played by beautiful Isabella Rossellini. If you know, you know. She gives her eerie spiel about the Fountain of Youth, and for a large sum of money, gives it to Madeline. And after she takes the potion, she then gives Madeline this warning. Quote, "Take care of yourself. You and your body are going to be together a long time. Be good to it." Also, she needs to disappear in 10 years as she'll be immortal and her looks won't change. And then also talks about others who have popped up too early to cause a stir. So don't do that. Soon we see that the potion works and she is excited to go live her new life. But all the while, Helen has convinced Ernest that Madeline is the problem and reason why she and he can't be together and why his life is so miserable. And the only way they can be together is to kill Madeline, which Ernest agrees to, but plans go awry as he and Madeline get into an argument as soon as she gets home, and he pushes her down the stairs, very dramatic fall, and thinking he has killed her, calls Helen to come up with a new plan. But she isn't dead. Nope, she's just definitely broken. Like, neck, everything's broken, twisted. After calling her a miracle, Ernest tries to take her to the hospital where the on-care doctor dies from shock of seeing her, and they return home where he tries to fix her. But Helen has arrived, not knowing that Madeline was not quite dead, and they get into a fight with Madeline shooting her in the stomach. But of course, Helen is also not dead, and they discover they have both taken the potion. And Ernest realized that they are not miracles, but they used magic, which is, kind of the same thing. No?
Yeah.
After a long fight scene, long hilarious fight scene with a hole in her stomach, so many things, the ladies hash out their differences and come to Ernest to ask them to fix them because they are in quite a state, which he does, but states he's leaving them both. He's not going to be a part of this. And after they are fixed, they realize they need Ernest if they ever need a touch-up or any of the fixings. So hit him in the head with a vase, because, why not? And take him to Liesel to convince him to take the potion. But when he wakes up, he is sitting with Liesel, who tries to talk him into taking the potion, but he realizes that he doesn't want to live forever and that that type of existence isn't natural or healthy, and he tries to escape with the potion. He tries to leave. All the while there's a giant party with all the people who has also taken the potion: James Dean, Greta Garbo, Elvis, all those people. Soon he is able to escape, though Madeline and Helen try to get him back. Then we cut to a final scene at Ernest's funeral where they talk about how eternal life for him was his legacy and his children. And we see Helen and Madeline in the back laughing and cackling. But it is Ernest who has the last laugh as they are stuck together miserably and crumbling forever. Literally, they fall apart.
Yeah.
The end. So I felt like there were so many things, but it's such a fantastic idea of a movie that it really did come off in such a way that it was huge for, I think, just at being that cult classic. Again, the 90s gave us some really great movies, including things like Beetlejuice and this. And I just thought about Beetlejuice because we were talking about, I believe it's Monica Bellucci, who I think she's kind of on that same level as like Isabella Rossellini, of being this iconic sex symbol that just kind of turns everybody's heads like, who is that? But anyway, these movies have like garnered all this attention because they were revolutionary, I believe, at the time. So with that, we're going to talk about themes and tropes. And it sounds, I think the way the outline is stated, it sounds like it's just hate for the movie. But when I rewatched it, realizing how much I loved it as a kid, to this is one of those many things that fed into the 90s trope of I'm not that kind of girl conversation and competing with girls as a thing. And I know that's been around for a while, but I feel like the 90s and 80s really pushed that hardcore. Even though it does kind of hash itself out, it really was like, ugh. And the only sane one we see here is a dude. And let's be honest, the director doesn't have the best reputation when it comes to the women he directs. So to me, it was intentional. And there was a lot of conversations, a lot of articles talking about that. But I feel like women, and we're going to talk about like the queer community, really took it back and was like, nah, this isn't about you. It's for us. Meryl Streep and Goldie Hawn, Isabella Rossellini is for us. So I think that's really changed. But, we can't not talk about some of these tropes that really fed into this era, which includes women hating women, like the frenemies. The frenemies really came through, and I don't think that term had started when this movie was about. But I mean, this is quintessential frenemies, calling each other mads, calling each other hell. Come on, like that's an immediate turn to. And yeah, always competing with each other. That is the number one from jump. Like using Madeline as a test for her men was a whole thing.
Yeah. And I will say, like, for me, because the first time I watched this was last year, right? I do think that there's a lot of really interesting conversation and like dark satire and humor here that we can relate to, but it is got that problematic layer also in real life. But
right.
I would say like their frenemy-ness of like, it's very comical almost of how Helen was like rewatching scenes of Madeline getting murdered in a movie she'd done. Like she was obsessed. And we've talked about this before. Really, Bruce Willis's character, who did come out looking like he was the best one of them, he's the one that like they should have been mad at him.
Right.
But she was just this idea of Madeline had ruined her life and kind of those machinations she did of I'll tell them both like, oh, I'm not mad at you. He's the one that did it. And then telling
Right.
Bruce Willis's character, oh, I'm not mad at you. She's the one that did it. And then having this whole like murder plot.
Right.
It's a very exaggerated, of course, example of kind of that idea, but it is comical in the sense of I love how they have their like shovel fight, and then they're kind of like, oh, they like talk it out, and they're like, oh, all this time, okay.
Which it kind of notes, like if you watch New Girl, this is where I think it's funny because they talk about the fact that dudes hit each other and then they're okay. This is that kind of same notion that violence is in the actual answer because everything's fine. You're like, that's not how that works. Like when violence gets involved, people die. And here, people die. They just couldn't die and they had to do this. So it was interesting to that. Women hating women. I think this is something specific because I was thinking about this when I was watching it. And Anney, maybe you were thinking about this too, that monsters don't have any redeeming factors. And here the two women have no redeeming factors to the audience. And they're not supposed to. As in fact, articles had written that this was the point. From the writer's perspective, they did not want you to like him. That this was their Frankenstein, and Frankenstein is not the victim. Although it turns out he is. Like people really do, like yeah, you do. But in the end, like this was that idea: is like you can't. There's no redeeming quality. They're just shady. Even at his funeral, she's laughing at them because they can't understand the greater wisdom that he is given.
Right, and it's also like. I think that's part of the reason why it's become a cult classic is because it's kind of fun to see like these women just be terrible.
Right.
But like the other side of that is it's the very tropey women just want to get married and stay young forever. And they didn't care about him at all. They just wanted the man and were jealous of each other.
Right.
When they had him. And then when they had him, they're like, oh, you're worthless. Like, so I can see why it's like a really fun thing. And I had a good time watching it, but it is also kind of like, yeah, well.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and then another theme, the obsession with youth. Not men, though, because, they're the wise ones that understand this is the growth. But I found it interesting. So they're supposed to be in their late 40s, or 50s, and they're around the same age. I think Goldie Hawn ended up being like 47. Meryl Streep ended up being like 44, which I was like, wait, Meryl Streep is younger than Goldie Hawn, which threw me off for some reason. And then Bruce Willis was the youngest of them all, and he was like 37. And I was like, really? Balding does not help because Goldie Hawn, my gosh, they are both in their late 40s in this movie, and I'm like, they're older than me, but they look younger than me. I'm like, again, I understand Hollywood, makeup, all those things, so I get that. But still, they looked amazing then. To me, in my head, they were not in their 40s, late 40s. Not that that matters, because it doesn't really matter, but like you can't always tell, obviously. But like, they are supposed to be around that age. But with that, we all understand about like they don't really talk about the biological clock, which I'm really glad they don't. But it is said, and I thought it was funny, that when he dies, he ended up having like 7 children.
Yeah.
Like a lot of children. And it was like he's supposed to be also in his 50s and found this young wife. And I'm like, huh. So in himself, with his legacy, he still had to have like a youthful interaction in order to have that. So even though he didn't chase that, he does chase that. He chases immortality through his children, which is also oftentimes a mistake as well.
Yeah, and even at his funeral, the preacher outright says that. But I also thought it was interesting. There's a lot of allusions that are very purposeful to stuff like Frankenstein, but also like God and him being like the god of like he can grant this youth, and they're so like determined to have him because they want to always look young. But there are a lot of allusions to him being like God. Yeah,
that's true. And I did think that, again, though they did say men are not obsessed with youth, they are the wise one, but it does say unless they're emasculated. So it took him being even more emasculated, like outright being talked down on by women, for him to grow some balls, and I'm putting that in quotes even though they don't say that, in order to like make him that wise guy. And I'm like, this is some incel shit.
So much of that was present in a lot of our popular movies.
It's true. And like people ate that up. You know, like,
Yeah, I mean, he kills Madeline because
Yeah.
she's being real mean, but not, you can't just
It
kill
doesn't
people
matter, right? She was
because they
leaving. Let her
yeah,
leave.
let
I
her
don't
leave.
understand.
But he's like, oh, I'm finally standing up for myself. I'll kill her.
And then everybody kind of like roots for that a little bit. They're like, oh, like it's very indifferent.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so we see, like, McVey, this is real. In this day and age, this is real bad.
Mm-hmm.
This is real bad. Another theme that I'm going to put in there, because I saw this phrase a lot when I was reading about this movie, but the perils of mortal sins. Again, kind of the same reference about like being God, playing God, him being the God. It's that idea that vanity, obviously, is one of the biggest sins that women specifically have and fall prey to and succumb to, which again, men don't know. It's not necessarily about youth or vanity, but about immortality, which I found interesting because that's kind of that reference to Elvis and James Dean. Like they don't necessarily like care about staying young because they all die young, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
It's just about that immortality, it seems.
Right. And it's hard to watching this now to know exactly like the intent, but I did feel like that, like I said, there was a lot of dark humor and satire
Oh,
and
for sure.
acknowledgement of women. We've been trained to do this. We've been trained to, our value is in our youth and our beauty and fighting over that. And I did think there was a lot of interesting commentary around that, which we've also talked about in a ton of other things, but like it's one of those conversations about women getting ahead, doing what is maybe in quotes like anti-feminist, but it is the system we live in. It's like that kind of reality we live in of, yeah, getting cosmetic surgery or what have you. All of the conversations we have around that, where we know like that in our society, it's hard to blame someone for doing that.
Yeah.
But seeing it in such a like campy, like escalated manner, uh, it's just interesting. I had a lot of thoughts about like, huh. Because it's acknowledging that that's true, but it's also kind of making fun of it, which I'm not
Right.
sure not sure if that's the right take.
Right.
But it is dark humor, it's satire, so
Right. I think there's definitely like a conversation about who it's making fun of at whose expense.
yeah.
And that was one of the bigger conversations, like what they were trying to do versus what happened, which is great. What happened was better result to this.
Yeah.
And understanding that, yes, this is satirical, but were you actually making fun of?
Right.
And under that perils of mortal sin, we see the sin of comparison. Because again, this is back to hells of mass, just competing with each other nonstop. Even the pity party. You're the one who started this. You're the one who abused me. You're the one who made fun of me. You're the one who took my men. Like all these things back and forth. Even in the hashing out, they were trying to do that. And then also at the end, they were comparing, I'm the one who has carried this out. Like the constant back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought that was also an interesting part of this again, like when it comes to a theological look, even though it's not a lot theologically, but it is. There's an underlying depth to it, line to it.
Yeah.
But yeah. And with that, yes, this is one of the movies that people will say is a queer cult classic and queer icon for many. Here's a quote from Pace Magazine from writer B. Panther, who wrote this article titled "The Queer Immortality of Death Becomes Her." They write, "So, what is it about Death Becomes Her that allows for queer enjoyment? How can there be anything queer in a film which, according to the screenwriters, has 'don't be unnatural' as its moral center? There's a long history of monsters and queers identifying with each other. Both are called unnatural because they defy social boundaries said to be found within a divine order. Monsters like the ones made by Victor Frankenstein or painted by Ernest Menville walk the supposedly firm line between living and dead, and queer people similarly skirt hardened sexual and gender lines. It's a logical link that a queer appreciation of Death Becomes Her begins with a willing identification with its monstrous characters. And they continue to go on to dissect the characters individually and then together and how they fit perfectly into those queer role models that they see so much. And then also, the movie has actually been used as themes for shows like RuPaul's Drag Race. And here's a quote from the executive producer of that show about why the movie was so appropriate. They're fighting for beauty. They're against the system. They're also villains, but we understand their complexity. We root for the undead divas because they're trying to win a game that's rigged against them. And to borrow an apocryphal quote from Ginger Rogers, they sort of have to do it backwards in high heels. And I have heard that. But yeah, like just coming in conversation about having to spend money to look like something, to meet to someone's standards, to stay relevant in the game, and then to be noticed, you have to be then perfectly skinny, perfectly made up, and somewhat successful and youthful. So I was like, okay. And of course, there's so much more. They talk about, again, the depth of the characters' conversations with each other and how they cross boundaries. The makeup,
the costuming,
the costumes alone. This movie really did open up boundaries that people talked about. Meryl Streep talked about the fact that this will be the only, and it was, I think, the last movie that had so much CGI. She said it was one of the hardest that she has ever done, and it felt like she was just talking to a puppet, and it was miserable because she was like, it would be like me talking to a can, pretending like it's Goldie Hawn. But if I was off by a centimeter, they'd have to start all over again because my head didn't go backwards in the right place.
Yeah.
She was just like, and I hated it. It was such a great movie. And this movie is and she says it's a true depiction of the Hollywood scene and its obsession with age.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's a whole different conversation because, we know Meryl Streep has always been very upfront about natural beauty and not wanting to change herself. And she has become somewhat controversial because she refused to conform to the norms of what society was telling her, or at least Hollywood was telling her at the time where it was really, really big. And then we have Goldie Hawn, who like leans into that and be like, yeah, I did all this work. I love it. I want this for me and I did this for me. Like I love that there's such a juxtaposition of two actresses who have very open conversations about this, about their own body and self. But yeah, it was an interesting take, and it did open up so many doors when it came to realizing how big CGI would be. Of course, today's kind of changed, and I don't understand if they did that well for a 90s movie. What happened to The Mummy 2?
Oh, we don't have time for me to go into the answer, but I do know the answer. I will say, because I am a big nerd about this kind of stuff, this was one of the first times Industrial Light and Magic, Lucasfilm, did a skin graft. And it was one of the first times they did graphics like this. And Jurassic Park was the next one that they did. Yeah. So that I think that's probably one of the reasons people were like, the hell? She's got a pole sticking out of her middle.
Like that was, it looked so good. Like even for today's really standard. And again, I was like, maybe I'm wrong. Anney, did I not?
No, I mean, you can tell it's like older, but it still looks.
It looks still good. Like in comparison, again, can we talk about?
Oh, Samantha, I would be happy to talk about that.
And again, like I was like, maybe this is my COVID brain. Maybe I'm in a fog.
No,
but this looks really good.
No.
Like her head going backwards and then like her trying to put it back on was so genius.
Yeah.
And of course, it was also probably a compilation of both like legit effects and the CGI. Because, we know the contacts for Goldie Hawn's character to look dead, her eyes and all that. Like it was genius. The voice that Meryl Streep had to put on, or maybe they CGI'd it, I don't know, to sound like her whole neck was dislocated and like she was a mess. But like it was an amazing like new standard for the movies, I think.
Yeah, and it was in a lot of ways it was really fun and atmospheric. This is a good Halloween movie. I can see it because it's like got this like body horror. It's got all this like twisting of body parts, but it's like a really campy fun thing.
Yes.
But it's also like got storms constantly, rain. You've got kind of a castle-ish
You got that mansion,
house.
scary mansion.
Yeah. So it was, I had a good time. And I have to say, I was telling Samantha, I rewatched this time knowing it was like a queer cult movie, and I was like, oh, I see it. But there was a line, I believe Isabella Rossellini said something like, when your body feels like it's not yours. She said something, I was like, mm-hmm.
Yeah. And they do talk about that, her specific character being queer, because it is like very like sexual, but you don't know who is for, like whomever is in the room.
Mm-hmm.
She fills that void.
Yeah.
So if it is Meryl Streep, like that sexuality still very raw and open there, even if it is Bruce Willis. Yeah, I mean, honestly, it was more sexual tension between her and Meryl Streep to me than her and Bruce Willis, which I think is another part of that.
Yes. Yeah.
And that she, again, exudes her whole presence is sexuality, that immortality, that sin, again, that perils of mortal sin.
Right.
To want that to be that is to be sexual, and she is just that sexual being.
Yeah. And for a later date, like larger conversations about queer coding of villains and the history of that, but like queer coding of camp and the history of that. But I had a good time. I enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you for this journey. And you know what? I sent you that video about that musical, which I was like, oh, this is really hilarious take. And it is really insane. We need to visit this. And again, I think we need to bring Eves on for that one because we've talked about it. She and I have talked about
You're
this
both
one.
musical people. This is not related to Death Becomes Her, but
No, but it's one of those things. But I think, of course it is. It is also very queer coded, even though it is really troublesome, like backwoods BS. And I'm talking about Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. For those who know, I think you know. But there is like that, like, yeah, they were definitely like
Seven Brides for Seven Brothers.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh no. Well, it does have something I want to talk about that will probably have to be a separate episode. But one of the things that annoys me the most is the romanticization of Stockholm Syndrome. I hate that.
Oh, yeah. I
hate that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Real problematic.
You can talk about the realities of it, but I hate when you romanticize it.
Yep. It is insane.
But I do think there is a Death Becomes Her musical.
So it happened in Chicago, it looks like April 30th to June 2nd of 2024, which the Broadway version is happening on October 23rd.
All right. Listeners, if you have been, get to go, let us know. I also know there's a lot of drag shows around Death Becomes Her. So if you've been to one of those.
RuPaul.
Yeah.
RuPaul did their whole thing. So I need to find out how that went.
Yes. But listeners, if you've participated, seen, done any of these things, have thoughts about this, please let us know. As Samantha said, we'll probably do 2 movies this month, but we love horror movies all the time, or related movies all the time. So if you have any suggestions, send them our way. You can email us at stuffmediamomstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can find us on Twitter at momstuffpodcast or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff Mom Never Told You. We're also on YouTube. We have a TeePublic store, and we have a book you can get wherever you get your books. Thanks, as always, to our super producer, Christina, our executive producer, Maya, and our contributor, Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff I Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.